Morning, everyone. Thanks for jumping on. So this is session 2 of our Copilot webinar series. Last week, we looked at the free version of Copilot Chat and how it compares to the paid Microsoft 365 Copilot license and the jump in capability when you move from chat only. So this week, we'll be looking at a real-world example of a Copilot rollout. Here in Viatel, we've taken the approach of being customer zero. So using Copilot internally first to understand what works, what doesn't, and how to roll it out effectively. So I'm joined today by Microsoft Solutions Architect Brian O'Shea, who will be interviewing our own Director of AI and Strategy, Ailish O'Connor. So they'll be sharing how we approached our Copilot adoption journey, along with some of the key learnings and practical insights along the way. If you have any questions, please pop them in the Q&A. We'll try to get to everything during the session, but if not, we'll follow up with you afterwards. So with that, I'll hand over to you, Brian and Ailish. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Rachel. Welcome, everybody. I'm looking forward to discussing Viatel's AI journey with Ailish O'Connor. And Ailish, thank you for taking the time to sit down with me to discuss your AI journey. I guess I'll start with framing the journey, right? So very early on in your AI journey, Viatel has positioned itself as customer zero, right? So as a partner should, they're learning first to lead customers later. So can you take us back to the town hall where you launched this, and what was the business case you were really making to the organization at the time?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So I suppose we were early in the journey. We'd already spotted that, Gen AI, I love a good Gartner hype cycle. So it was already starting to go from, the peak of inflated expectations. It was starting to go into the track of disillusionment. And for me, that's really when technology leaders need to act, right? Because people are going to, go through that track of disillusionment, but get through it fairly quickly, especially with AI as things are moving so quickly. So I felt, as one of Ireland's top CSP partners, we really needed to lead by example, and work very closely with Lisa and Rachel on our strategy and how we would approach that within the business as customer zero. So we landed that with the leadership and at the very highest level with the board and the CEO, and there was buy-in from everybody, and that buy-in was absolutely critical from the start. So well over a year ago, we launched our customer zero story. We had our strategy, which was our 3-2-1 approach, 3 quick wins, 2 meteor projects, and 1 big bet. And look, at that is actually evolving as we go along, and it changes as we learn. But really, the main thing for us was we just need to start. We need to get people using AI. We need to get, I suppose, AI in people's hands and make sure that they're not afraid of using it, that they have the education, they have the comfort and the confidence to then bring it into their everyday work. Because bringing AI down and telling people what to use it for, in my opinion, was never going to work, because the people who are really going to make the difference are the ones that know the processes inside and out. And that's the people who are doing it every day. So it's very important for us to land the strategy at the town hall where everybody in the organization attends, and then to follow it up with things like surveys. So we wanted to get, test the waters to see where people were at with regards to their knowledge and their comfort around AI. And then we built a whole program on the back of that. So we have our steering group, which is very important. It's made up of, leaders across the business from our Microsoft practice, our CISO, who represents our cybersecurity posture, and our IT. There's myself, there's our head of compliance, and there's change consultant as well internally within the business. So between us, we have, I suppose, made sure that we built security, compliance, and people into our entire I suppose, approach to AI and Copilot adoption.
Brilliant. That's what I'm going to touch on next. Is so you mentioned your AI strategy reports directly to the CEO on board, right? So you're providing regular town hall updates. How much of Viatel's progress would you put down to that level of executive sponsorship versus the technical work itself?
It's absolutely critical, because otherwise it's just experimentation. It's just people doing it, if they enjoy it or not. When it comes down from the top, it's like culture. When it comes down from the top, people realize that it's important and that they should be doing it as part of their daily work. And then having that buy-in, make sure that it's top of conversation at every single town hall, every single communication that we have, both internal and external. And it just means people realize the importance of it, that it's not just something that we're doing, for the fun of it. It's actually part of our strategy.
And is that something you would recommend doing from the outset, or, pilot first, or is that something you kind of put as top of your agenda to kind of go after very early on, is to get that buy-in?
Well, that we did that even before the town hall launch.
Yeah.
Because without that buy-in, so it's like any strategy, it cascades down from the top. So it's one thing from the CEO, but then the SLT and all the management then below that have to feel that it's part of the strategy, and they have ownership and responsibility for making it happen. So that is absolutely critical. Before you even launch it to the entire organization, you have to have that buy-in from the top.
Thanks, Ailish. I'm just going to focus now on the foundations of an AI journey, right? So before you rolled out a single Copilot license in Viatel, you did significant groundwork on data classification, sensitivity labeling, and DSPM through Purview. Why was that a non-negotiable for you? And what do you think the risks of skipping that would have been early on in the journey?
Yeah, look, well, this has been a journey even before we started talking about AI, because data, data protection, data governance, that's important whether you're using AI or not. And the scary fact is, I was looking up a few stats, about 80 to 90% of enterprise data is unstructured, which means it's sprawling, it's scattered, it's in emails, Teams chats, it's everywhere, right? And then over 50%, even if you have brought in data classification and sensitivity and so on, over 50% of enterprise data is still dark data, which means it's unused, it's not analyzed, and it's not governed. So that to me is terrifying in itself, right? Is that there's this data that is ungoverned, there's no visibility of it. But then when you layer on AI, the risk just increases, because with all of that data sprawl, without AI, the chances of people finding it or accessing it are low enough. But then all of a sudden you're introducing this technology that can act like that can reach out into the bowels of your organization and can return data that people are not necessarily supposed to see, or even if they're supposed to see it, they're not supposed to share it. So that was really, really important, that we first of all understood our data, that we discovered information about our data. So if you look at DSPM and all the different steps for it, I mean, the main thing is understanding what your exposure is and what your risk is. So, you need to discover your data. You need to classify then what's not classified. So we brought in a policy. I mean, we're no different than anybody else. I mean, we've grown through acquisition. We have data there that is dark data. It wasn't accessed for some time. But what do you do with that data? So what we decided to do was classify that at the highest sensitivity and then put in a new label that is relabel. So the thing is, if nobody accesses that data within, we'll say 6 months, then we know that data is nobody is using it. So it is technically dark data. But then if somebody has, well, then that moves it back into the, the properly classified data. And it then means that all of the policies, all of the compliance that we've built in through Purview, that now applies to that documentation and all of, I suppose, that data as well.
Really interesting, right? That this is a problem that kind of predated AI, right? This was technical debt that organizations accrued at the time and continue to accrue, right? So, and I always give the analogy on this that, AI can find stuff, but if you use M365 search, you're still going to be able to find the same things, albeit you have to try a bit harder and you have to be more specific with your keywords, but the risk still exists, right? So I think whether you're imminent on your AI journey or you're planning it maybe a year down the line, I think this is something that needs attention anyway within organizations, right?
100%. Actually, I heard a great analogy from a customer there during the week, that before people would have cabinets of physical files and data. And you had one owner, you had the key owner, and they would shred when it needed to be shred. They would clean up, and they knew exactly, what was in that cabinet. But then once everything shifted, to digital, all of a sudden people just presumed that IT now owned this data. It's, oh, that's your problem now. That's not my problem. So I think a big learning for us, and it's been something that we've been pushing for many, many years, but AI just brings it right up to the top, is the concept of data custodianship, data ownership. If you create a file, or if you create a Teams channel or a SharePoint site, you are technically responsible for making sure that that data, is there. And it's still a journey, right? Because a lot of people find that very boring. They're like, why would I do that when I've got 50 other things to do? So it is important, and it's just a case of keeping on at it and just constantly trying to, I suppose, to improve.
Yeah, I refer to it as ugly work, right? Nobody wants to do it, but it needs to be done.
Yes.
And yeah, and look, if you can find a partner like Viatel that can help you navigate that, and and not only just secure the data, but making sure that you're putting relevant data into your AI agents and your AI tooling, and that what's being surfaced, they say garbage in, garbage out, right? So making sure it's good data. I want to shift back to something you mentioned earlier about experimentation, right? So I'm guessing, like other organizations, not everything you piloted within Viatel has made it to production, right? So I'm guessing
100%.
some are paused or reduced to proof of concept. Can you share one that didn't work and what it taught you as an organization?
There was one that always stands out to me, and it was an old process within a team. So the team had migrated to a system, and most of the processes had gone into that, and that was fine. But there's a couple of processes that stayed outside of the new system. So these were older processes that have been around for quite some time. And every day there was an action taken that was quite laborious. It would take, about an hour and a half every morning to do this action. And then the question was, could we automate it? So as we were digging deeper into it and looking at it, and we're thinking, God, how are we going to automate this? This is actually quite challenging. And then we asked the question, why are you doing this? Then the person was like, I'm not really sure. And we're like, can we look into, do we still need to do this? Because, things have changed. We've changed as a business. And we just said, look, just ask the question, do you still need to do this? And in the end, it was actually a redundant step that wasn't needed for some time. But it was still taking up, a big chunk of the person's time every morning. So even though we didn't actually end up automating the process, we actually still ended up streamlining it and freeing up a couple of hours every day for that person by simply asking the question, does this process still need to work the way it is right now? So I think that whole openness to change and thinking about process re-engineering and just asking yourself the question, does this still serve us? Does this still serve me? Is this the way that we should be doing it? And it's just it was AI that brought that question out, but actually the answer wasn't AI in the end.
I mean, challenging the status quo, right? Because just because
Yes.
it's always been that way doesn't mean it's the right way. And like we even see that in our own organization here at Microsoft. We're part of sales teams, we're part of partner solution teams, and there's processes that are fairly good, but there are opportunities to optimize them. And sometimes it's about just being curious as to why actually are we doing it that way, as you mentioned. So yeah, it's really, really relevant. So let me kind of shift to the pace of AI change, right? So you mentioned Copilot changes quickly, right? And sometimes without you even knowing, right? If you're not
Yes.
on top of your changes within the M365 messaging center, right? So how do you keep training current within Viatel when the product is moving under you? So, how do you track those changes? How do you make sure that people within the business have the training and the tools needed to go and, leverage these tools? I mean, if I taught someone, I always give the analogy. I have a really good friend here at Microsoft who went on maternity leave last year and came back. And the Copilot she knew when she went on maternity leave was a very different Copilot that she returned to after maternity leave 12 months later. So as an organization, how do you manage that, or how do you stay on top of it?
Well, it is a challenge. It's very difficult because you don't want to overload people with updates and everything. So actually, I think what's more important is teaching people how to fish, that you're not just handing them the information, because it's all there, right? And the very first thing I tell people when they get a license is if you don't know what to do with Copilot, ask it. If you don't know how something is working, just ask. Just
Yeah.
use the tool itself as a training tool, and be curious. We've developed some, for example, use cases for different roles within the organization, again, just to tweak that, the imagination of people to go, oh, I didn't think of that. Let me try that. And then I find that once that light bulb goes off, they will start getting deeper. They'll get better at prompting. They'll realize, oh, I can go to Copilot and ask it for something that I need. And then the Microsoft Copilot Academy is very good as well. So I do guide people towards there and online material as well, because honestly, it would be a full-time job for us if we were to try to keep on top of that ourselves. But it is important. So when we have things like certifications and so on, we try to get as many people across the organization as well to do it, not just people that are, in digital services or working in Microsoft. It is important to try and spread that knowledge as well. And generally what you find, the people who are really curious will always find a way to learn. I did hear quite an ingenious strategy from a sales guy yesterday. He said that whenever he's in the office, he tries to sit himself between Rachel and Lisa. I'm like, okay, well, that works. Because then when he's on Copilot, he can ask questions. So that's another way as well. What I do encourage people is, if you learn something that's quite cool or quite, interesting, that could help other people, especially in your team or cross teams, to share knowledge, to start building up that community of knowledge between people. Because I think that's really the only way that you can embed it in an organization, is if you encourage that kind of organic curiosity and that organic sharing of knowledge.
On that topic, obviously we work at tech-first organizations, right? Our business is tech, and I'm always cautious not to assume tech literacy when I speak to my customers, right? There's always an understanding that maybe their business isn't tech first. How important do you think it is that we don't just assume AI literacy amongst our end users in our business, and that we do provide the right tools?
Yeah.
How high up the priority list should that be?
Yeah, I think it's really important because, I suppose I'm talking about myself and other people who may have been immersed in it. But if you don't have, if you're not up there already and comfortable with technology, because it's not, a very challenging technology to at least learn and to start using in your daily life, but actually you need the confidence to begin with. So I think that's really important, is getting that foundation and getting the support, from the likes of Viatel or Microsoft, and making sure that everybody is starting at a level playing field. And we would have spent a lot of time at the start. We would have ran a number of webinars, we had workshops, we set up, our champions groups, again, to make sure that everybody at least is comfortable at a certain level. So I think getting that grounding first. And there were probably some people that were sitting the trainings going, oh my God, this is so basic. But even just things like prompt engineering and what makes up a good prompt, we almost take it for granted now at this stage, but a lot of people would not know what makes up a good prompt. So I think getting that foundational level of knowledge that's consistent across the business is important. Even before, you start talking about, edit mode, it's called now, but agent mode and all of that kind of stuff, it all kind of changes. But like I said, if you can give people that foundational knowledge and comfort, then you can start talking about the more complex stuff, or they'll figure it out themselves.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We've done our own study here at Microsoft, because obviously we were customer zero for Copilot, and that initial learning curve is all about efficient prompting. Just learning the prompt, be comfortable with prompting, and learning how to structure a good prompt can go a long way in terms of driving up your AI literacy. Because when you do, you start to see the benefits, and you just become more curious, and how can I get more out of this? And it's great to hear. I read through, obviously, Viatel's customer journey blog, and I've kind of noticed something you mentioned, the shift from AI assisting people to AI executing tasks and processes. When did that shift become real for Viatel? When did you move from, this is nice, Copilot helps me do and brings me back information, to actually AI is delivering tasks, it's delivering outcomes?
It was probably a few months in, but I would still say we're at the start of that journey. To me, it feels like this piece of the journey is going to go on much longer. This is going to be the piece that is going to be harder to crack, but will have the most impact. Um, and um, and I think like that we kind of spent a lot of time at the start getting people comfortable, even just letting people know they could use AI. Because, a lot of people are in work, in other parts of the world and going, oh, should I be using this or not? And it's almost like a shameful secret. It's like, I shouldn't tell anyone that I'm using AI. But I think that kind of opened up people's minds then, okay, we can use it, we can get them up to a certain level. And then as people are growing. So really in the last few months, that piece has started accelerating in multiple parts of the business, right? Before you might have had just one or two people that were very curious about agents and so on. Now we've everything from the SLT to, different teams building agents. And now, in fact, and I know we'll probably touch upon it later on, but we're almost at that phase where, to me, there's like three different types of agents. In my head, this is how I kind of classify them, and I know Microsoft are kind of the same as well. There's like, your personal agent. It's your day-to-day, activity. It has access to the same data that you have. And to me, that's fine. Everybody go off, build your own little agent, get it to help you during the day. Absolutely fine. No need to have much oversight on that. Then you have kind of agents that, they start getting more into the processes of a team. And that's when, they start automating more, within a team, other people start using it. And then the question arises. Now, it still might be, fairly governed from a data perspective and so on. But then you start getting into questions like who owns the agent? What happens if that person moves on? How do you make sure that, if something stops working or, we want to improve the agent, who owns it? Who helps? Who's responsible? And then you have the autonomous agents or agents that are used to create things like vibe coding and so on, where people now want to integrate with other systems and so on. To me, that's where I think we as a company, but I would encourage everybody as they're going on their AI journey to actually think forward to that step. Because I think if we were to do something earlier, it would have been putting in that framework so that we have those kind of guardrails. Because when you start talking about that third type of agent that's integrating to different systems, that's accessing data, doing stuff with data as well, that's a completely different ballgame. So it's great with AI that you can have people that are thinking this way and, that now have the ability to do things like coding and so on, but might not necessarily thinking about the business impact, the security impact, the data governance around it, even things like secure code development and things like that. That's a completely different ball game, that when you get to that level. So to me, that's something that I wish that we had put in place earlier, is that kind of that framework. But it is something that we plan on launching this week, actually.
So you mentioned the importance of the agent governance framework. How important is it to pair it with a tool like Agent 365?
It's the exact same as with Purview. Unless you can actually see, discover, assess, it's very difficult to govern anything, right? Visibility is the key to all of governance, whatever you're talking about. So Agent 365 will completely change that, for businesses, that you can actually see what's happening with agents. You can build your guardrails and so on into it. And again, I think I had a post about it, a few weeks ago. That is the game changer in my perspective, is going from, that level 1, 2 agents to now actually being comfortable bringing in that level 3 agent building and use of agents as well.
Yeah, and look, it's something I talk to customers about as well, and I talk to partners about, is the importance of having both, right? Otherwise, if you're just going with Agent 365, hoping it's going to solve all your problems, you've basically just got a nice vista to the problem, and
Yeah.
it won't actually solve the problem itself.
Yes.
If you were advising an Irish mid-market business or an SMB that's just starting out, what's the one thing they must do, and what's the one thing they should absolutely avoid in terms of their AI journey? I'm putting you on the spot now.
It's probably the same thing. Don't just turn it on and expect the best.
Yeah.
You have to put work. You have to put work into it. From your security, from your governance, your data governance, but also your people, right? AI isn't just something that should happen to people. They should be part of that journey. So unless you have all of those parallel streams as part of your strategy, it's just going to be something that you switch on. You won't know the risk. You won't know if people are even using it, and then will it really have any impact? So that would be the big thing that I would say is don't just switch it on. Put in the work and actually do those steps.
Yeah, I'm going to answer this as well. I'm going to say don't give all your Copilot licenses to your IT team. Make sure you're getting them out across the business, even if you're just dipping the toe in the
100%.
water. Just make sure you're spreading it out there. Looking
And sorry,
12.
Brian, just on that, when we first introduced Copilot, we actually had a pool of licenses, and we have a use it or lose it policy as well.
Brilliant.
So
Love
it
it.
is a privilege. That's the way we said it. It's a
Yeah.
privilege to have a license. And we really want people to use it, to adopt it. And our pool has grown then as people in different parts of the business. To your point, it's not just IT, it's people within all parts of the business. All people managers, all teams have licenses within them. And it's a case that look at, if you're not using it, then there's Copilot chat. But really what you find is when you make something that people actually really need to think about a business case for, then that's when people will use it the most, and then it grows.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Last question, because we're coming up on time, right? We're going to kind of do a horizon view. So looking 12 months out, what does success look like for Viatel? And what does it look like for the customers you're currently helping through a similar journey?
It's a difficult question to answer because AI is changing so much and so quickly. Really where I want us to get to in Viatel is that AI becomes the infrastructure. It's not just a tool or a toy that people have. It actually becomes infrastructure within the business. So it becomes core to how we work and what we do. And it just means that we're able to scale and grow faster and quicker, and that people are happier in their job as well. That we're removing the mundane, and people are getting more creative, and I suppose getting the most out of the valuable work that will make an impact on the business. So that's really where I want us to get to. And from a customer perspective, it's exactly what I want for customers as well, is to bring them on that journey, make sure that they're getting the most out of AI and Copilot as well, make sure that they're feeling the impact from a business perspective. And to do that then is to bring them on that journey with, we want it to be a positive impact and not a negative impact. So making sure they have all the guardrails, the governance, the data protection, the security, and then the people side of it as well.
That's incredibly important, because no matter what changes in the next 12 months, the foundations remain, and having
100%.
invested the time in that, they'll stand the test of time. And yeah. Look, thank you so much, Eilish. We're just up on time for answering all of my questions. I really appreciate it. And honestly as well, right, just that candid view of how your journey happened at Viatel. And I think there's some great learnings in there for the customers that have joined. But yeah, just thank you so much for taking the time to sit with me today and answer the questions. I'll hand back to Rachel.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks so much, Eilish and Brian. That was really insightful. Hopefully it's given everyone on the call an idea of how to approach your own Copilot rollout in your organisation. If you have any questions or if you want to explore this further, please reach out to us. You'll receive an email shortly with the recording and a short form to fill out as well. And just